Rita and Ralph for that. Now, I am so fortunate to introduce our next guest to the sports trade floor. Not only is she one of the most influential executives in all of sports, she is a remarkable philanthropist, a former WWE Women's Champion, as well as the current commissioner of Raw. It is my absolute privilege, in conversation with the terrific Elizabeth Schulze of CNBC, to introduce to you the Chief Brand Officer of WWE, Stephanie McMahon.
I'm never gonna be done, lean on it. Now welcome to the queendom. The queendom, where the kings bow down. They relinquish the crown. Y'all gon' hit me now.
This is actually my entrance music in WWE, so welcome to the queendom, as it were.
So we're going to start off with a fun way to kick off this conversation.
Yes, for WWE, it's a lot of showing and not telling, so if you would please look at the video screens for a quick little sizzle. And in 3, 2...
The sizzle.
And roll tape.
There you go.
WWE. Three little letters. But one extraordinary experience.
I had the best time there.
I went out there and I just got caught up.
The energy in this place is unbelievable.
It's more than this.
WWE is the #1 sports channel on YouTube. WWE has been a major topic in all forms of social media. We are being seen all over the world. Well, you better get ready for WrestleMania. What's up, Kids' Choice Award?
The family.
My wife is Maurice. She is the Mrs. Get it? Ms. and Mrs.
And even more than a spectacle, we are family, friends, heroes. We are a community.
I quit across my eyes and don't even care if anyone sees me dance. Like I can fly and don't even think of touching the ground. Like a heartbeat skip, like an open page, like a one-way trip on an aeroplane. It's the way that
This was my best day ever.
brand new.
We are WWE.
Now that is a sizzle reel.
Thank you. And I dated myself. I said roll tape, right? Like you don't say that anymore.
That's relevant.
Everything's
It's gonna be
digital.
relevant in our discussion
Yes,
later.
yes.
Here. So Stephanie, thanks so much for joining us on stage today. We are talking about 5 tips for building a global brand, and hopefully that video gave you a little bit of an idea of what WWE is about. I want to talk about an event that happened over the weekend, which was the Crown Jewel. I'm just going to kick it off with something that maybe a lot of people here have heard about when it comes to WWE, and that was an event that you held in Saudi Arabia. Talk a little bit about the decision to hold that event there over the weekend.
Well, it was an incredibly difficult decision for our company. We were trying to weigh all of the different factors and ultimately made a business decision, based on contractual obligations and decided to go in, much the way other American companies are still doing business. And we held our event.
And WWE's global presence is something that will come up as clearly the topic of this conversation. That's something that's growing quickly. And is that a market that's important to you and overall in the
Absolutely. It's a market that's important to us. International is a huge focus for WWE when you consider that 70% of our views actually come from outside of the U.S., but only 40% of the revenue. So there's a big opportunity there, for WWE. And the thing about, it's actually one of the tips that I want to hit in terms of growing your global sports brand. If there's a handbook, it's bringing people together. It's empowering your audience. And sports can do that like nothing else. Ronda Rousey, who is a WWE superstar now, was the first ever female UFC champion and the first ever female inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame. She's now with WWE. She talked about competing at the Olympics and running alongside other competitors who she should have been in a horrible place with, given where the world was at that time. But they were able to share this mutual respect for one another as athletes. And I think that's so important. You need to build that community. You need to listen to your audience. You need to bring them together, not only connect them to your brand, but connect them to each other, because that is going to sustain your brand. That's what builds the longevity.
Let's talk a little bit about that storytelling, because such a big part of WWE, which you can see in the video, is that there's a story being told. How do you find the talent that can do that, and how important is that in building the brand that you are today?
Telling stories is hugely important, whether it's a sports brand, a marketing brand, entertainment brand, it doesn't matter, because stories are the most basic form of communication. I mean, think all the way back to, the Bible is full of stories because people put themselves into the stories. It makes it relatable. Maya Angelou has a great quote that people will, and I butcher this a little bit, but people will never remember what you said. They'll never remember what you did, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. Make people feel. And the best way to do that is to relate to them. Give them heroes to aspire to give them stories that inspire them, give them people to look up to, give them teams to root for, because when your team is in there gutting it out and they're the underdog, you're in it with them, and when they win, you win. That's empowering. It's something very simple, but it's one of the most important aspects of any brand. Think about the media, think about the news. What's the story? What's the headline? It doesn't matter what genre, that is the most important way to connect to your audience.
When it comes to WWE talent, how is the talent both performing and also sort of playing a role as a business person, as an athlete? How do you balance all of these? And I think people might be curious, how much do these people really do?
Well, WWE superstars are multifaceted, because not only are they actors, they are professional athletes. When you consider what they do, it's very athletic, their performance. They're in movies and television shows and Netflix shows. They are often keynote speakers. They walk red carpets. They do it all. And it is rare to find someone who has that capability. That's why we don't have more superstars, though we do have a strategy that we're using called global localization, where we are looking at recreating all of our performance centers all over the world. So we just launched in the UK. It's called NXT UK. And we're testing the model there, and we're hoping to grow it all over the world. Because, again, localization is so important. But then that will ladder up into the bigger, broad-based bands.
I think that brings us to another sort of tip when it comes to brands, which is creating an experience for your viewers. And I was surprised to hear that WWE is the most watched sports channel on YouTube, beating NHL, MLB, NBA.
NFL. Yep.
NFL. How'd you get there?
Well, let me just also give another stat, because I think even more impressive is that we're the second most viewed YouTube channel in the world. Second most viewed. Thank you. Thank you very much. I can take no credit for that, but we're behind a Bollywood channel called T-Series, and just slightly ahead of Ryan's Toy Chest, which is a little boy opening presents. But, digital and social has always been a huge part of our strategy. Again, it's that connecting. People are watching on all different platforms everywhere, and I've heard a lot of decision makers complain, that it's that much more difficult to reach your audience. But I think you need to look at it differently. You need to shift your perspective. It's that much more opportunity to connect with your audience the way they want to connect. That's the beauty of technology today, is your fan base or your consumer, they're very vocal. They will tell you exactly what they want. Data and analytics provide you the platforms to watch their usage patterns. We are currently in WWE building, we're a little bit behind Netflix, et cetera, but we are building, what looks like a honeycomb model because WWE's business model is really more akin to Disney. We have live events, we have WWE Studios, we have digital and social media, we have our advanced media group, all of our superstars, their own individual IP. I'm going around our brand wheel in my head, but all of those are different data points. And data and analytics are so important to us to help super serve our audience. But not only those touch points, we also have over 550 live events all over the world every year. We have, in essence, a unique focus group, almost every single night of the year, telling us what they like and what they don't like and what they don't care about, which is important to know too.
But a lot of the revenue still comes from traditional TV viewing. How do you separate content for those different platforms, and how do you eventually generate as much on some of those digital channels that you were just mentioning?
Well, you have to keep up with the monster, right? The more you create, the more demand there is. At least that's what you hope if your content is the quality that it should be, because you always want to deliver your audience an experience that's worthy of their passion. That should always be your goal. And we leverage a 3-tiered ecosystem: pay TV or linear, our AVOD strategy, which is digital and social media, and of course our direct-to-consumer, which is the WWE Network. And we were the first live streaming OTT service to launch.
Wow.
We were behind Netflix and Hulu, but the first live streaming. So it was a big calculated risk, which is another key lesson. We were actually pretty far down the pike with a linear model because our audience had demanded that they wanted their own WWE network. But we had some pretty good offers, actually, and they wanted to lock up our rights for 10 years. And we said, wait a minute, we're not going to do that. So we went back and did more research, and we found that our fans were 5 times more likely to watch online video content than the American norm, and we realized we had a huge opportunity. So in 8 months, we created the WWE Network and launched just in time for WrestleMania.
Wow.
Which is like our Super Bowl.
And that raises a point then when it comes to risks and challenges. Who are your competitors?
Everyone. It's a common talking point now. You hear people talk about competing for time, but that's absolutely what it is. You are competing against absolutely everyone out there on all different platforms. You're competing for people's time. And again, you have to be a brand that's worthy of people's time.
Let's talk about your audience, because you are largely credited for bringing in a very big female audience to WWE. 40% female is about right?
40%. Almost 40%.
I think is maybe surprising to some people out there. How did you do that? And where did you find these people? How did you bring them in?
Well, there's been a whole women's evolution that's happened in WWE. And it really started, again, by listening to our audience. So we used to have our women as secondary or even more often tertiary type characters in our show. They were not a part of the main event. They were not a part of the main storyline. And our fans had had enough. And they started a hashtag that trended worldwide for 3 days called Give Divas a Chance. At the time, we'd branded our division as the Divas Division. And their voices were so loud, calling for better character development, better storylines, more athleticism, longer matches, that our chairman and CEO, Vince McMahon, responded on Twitter, "We hear you, keep watching, hashtag Give Divas a Chance." Then at WrestleMania, we had one of our female Hall of Famers, Lita, go out, announce the rebranding of the Divas division to the women's division. She unveiled a new championship belt, more akin to the men's, but still very feminine, and announced that our women would now be called superstars, same as the men. Our women are now regularly headlining and main eventing pay-per-views. We signed Ronda Rousey, as I mentioned before, and perhaps the biggest, 2 really big outcomes, one more recent than the other. In Abu Dhabi, about almost a year ago, we had our female performers were allowed to perform in the ring for the first time ever. And they had to change their gear. They had only their hands and their head could show. But during their match, a chant broke out in the arena, both men and women chanting, "This is hope. This is hope," by seeing our women performing in the ring. Yeah. That's what the women's evolution in WWE is all about. And just a couple weeks ago, we had, for the first time ever, because our audience demanded it, our first all-women's pay-per-view live streaming event called Evolution. It was absolutely sold out, over 10,000 WWE fans screaming at the top of their lungs, and it trended #1 worldwide for 2 hours during the World Series and NFL Sunday Night Football.
Not
So
bad.
that's pretty impressive.
And you're a performer here too. So how important has this evolution been for you in your personal experience?
It's something I've dreamt about since I was a little girl. You know, I've always wanted to see equality and parity in WWE, and we still have a ways to go to get there, but we're getting there.
And when it comes to listening to that audience, I think that's another point we want to talk on. How did you view that hashtag and say, we're going to make a business decision off of this, we're going to change our brand, completely reshape ourselves? How do you make that decision, and how do you get from a hashtag to 40% audience?
By trying, by, again, taking that risk, taking that calculated risk based on the feedback, based on your audience's demand, trying to super serve what they're asking for, and by doing the right thing, because, by the way, these women, they've earned it. They're not being given an opportunity. They earned this opportunity, and they kill it in the ring every single time, often stealing the show. So when you make a business decision, it's important to try to make mistakes, quite frankly, and I think that the digital age allows you to do that more often. Take risks, fail, learn from your mistakes, and apply what you've learned. And that's what you have to do along the way. But I have to say, in terms of the women's evolution, every risk we've taken have absolutely paid off.
Do you worry that some of those stars that have generated the power for you, the Ronda Rouseys of the world, will the brand loyalty still be there even when they're gone, and especially in terms of this women's evolution?
I think if we're doing our jobs right, then hopefully we're creating new stars, always. I mean, that's a part of WWE's business model. That's the Performance Center that I was referencing earlier, NXT, which started off as our developmental brand and is now a third global touring brand in and of itself, which actually we don't do any paid marketing for. It's all done through digital and social media, and it sells out all over the world because our audience is connected to it. Our audience knows that they are a part of the reason why these stars make it from NXT to Raw and SmackDown. It is, again, that point of connection, giving your audience that voice, empowering them, letting them know that their voice matters. It's funny, I get railed on Twitter that we don't listen, but we really are. And we're doing it at a ground level. And I think that that's very unique to WWE.
And I'm just going to end on, where do you see this brand 10 years from now? Certainly different than 10 years ago. So what's your hope for what WWE is in 10 years?
10, 20, 30 years from now, there's no reason why we can't be as big or bigger than Disney. Now, that's a tall order, especially given recent transactions. However, there's no reason why we can't get there. You have to dream big, have big, bold goals, and go after them.
Stephanie, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys so much.
Guys.